From the Georgia Guidestones to global government, this week we're going to defend our global overlords. Stay tuned, because you're not going to want to miss this one. Welcome back to Success Magica, the FMS Mastermind podcast. I'm Nathan Frazier, internet marketer with face tattoos, and usually we talk about marketing, we talk about psychology, we talk about self-development, sometimes we talk about magic. None of that, or maybe a little bit of that this week, but we're going to go off the beaten track or off the beaten path for what this show usually is about. And today I'm going to play devil's advocate and kind of defend and criticize at the same time some of the global elite programs, agendas that seem to be in play nowadays. And the reason that I'm going to do this is for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's better to understand things from more than just one point of view. And I don't think that it's even worth speaking on things unless you can articulately argue your opponent's point of view. So I'm going to attempt to do that today on three main subjects, three main aspects, three main sources of contention out there. So let's go ahead and start off with the breaking news of the last couple of days, the Georgia Guidestones. And a lot of people never even heard of these things, but now it's hard not to hear about them because they were a monument that was out in, I think, Alberta, Georgia, I think is where it was at. It was somewhere in Georgia. And they were a monument resurrected by, some people say it was a Rosicrucian who resurrected them. I don't know. Nobody really knows who resurrected them, but they were a list of 10 commandments for rebuilding society in an enlightened era, is what some people say. Some people say it was a recipe for the New World Order. There was a bunch of different lists of bullet points on how society should be organized, and some of them made sense. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can find them on the internet. Some of them made sense to me. Some of them were a bit extreme. The one that was the most contentious, the one that drew the most attention and criticism from people, there was one on there that talked about maintaining a global society of like 50 million people or less, which is a drastic reduction in population from where we're at right now. And so a lot of people pointed to that and said, look, there's a global New World Order agenda to depopulate the planet. And I think that the accusations of that might have some teeth, because it does seem like there is a lot of depopulation propaganda out there. If you look at the current social justice movements out there, anything that results in less people on the planet has been reframed as a human right. If you want to chop up your body parts so that you can never have kids, that's your human right. If you want to kill as many babies as humanly possible before they're ever given a chance to survive in the world, that's your human right. If you want to marry somebody who there's no possibility of you ever having children with, that's your human right. Anything to reduce the population is now your human right. And I'm not going to argue that those things aren't your human rights. I don't really care either way about whatever you want to do to your body or whoever you want to fall in love with and get married to. None of that's none of my business. But it is impossible to ignore the fact that at least one side of the political aisle has picked all of those issues that result in less human beings and reframed every single one of them as a human right. And maybe the people in charge of running the planet, the people that run all of the giant corporations and hold all of the political power, maybe they're right. Maybe there are too many people on the planet. Maybe we are reaching a point where it's not sustainable. The planet can't afford to keep all of us alive anymore. We're on the edge of destroying the planet and killing all life on Earth as we know it. I tend not to believe that. I tend to think that they're being a little bit hyperbolic. I think that they're exploiting problems in order to get their goals accomplished. In fact, I think that if you look at most of the evidence, Population is at a point where it's going to start declining rapidly. In most westernized and first world countries, population is already at less than a replacement rate, and they're having to import immigrants from other countries in order to sustain the social security safety nets for elderly people. So I think that if we're being honest, the problem with population is not an explosion or overpopulation. The real problem that we're facing with population right now is the opposite. We're going to have a planet very soon where there's not enough people to keep things going. But I might be wrong on that, because there is the very real possibility of what they call the fourth industrial revolution, where there's no need for human beings at all anymore, where there's just everything is automated, all the jobs are automated, and everybody has all of their needs taken care of for them, and there's no jobs, and we end up having two problems. Number one, people go through life without any sense of purpose or fulfillment anymore, because work is something that gives people a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And without work, they don't have that anymore. And the other situation is the people that run stuff, the people that needed us in order to survive and be able to afford their lavish lifestyles, they won't need us anymore. It's like the owners of the factory. They put up with us while they needed the 800 people to run the factory. But now that they have a bunch of robots that can run the factory, they don't need the workers anymore. And so when you're the owner of the factory and you realize that you don't need the workers anymore, what do you do with them? Well, maybe a mass depopulation agenda. I'm just saying. Now, where I do tend to agree with them is when it comes to like pollution and stuff like that. I think that there is a lot of problems out there with pollution. I think that we live in a disposable society. We live in a society where we buy things and just consume and throw away so much garbage. And I think that we are contributing a lot to destruction of the planet that I'm not cool with. I don't like the unsustainable practices that a lot of businesses take part in. But then we run into the problem where it's these very same businesses, these very same business owners that point the finger at us. They're the ones that use excessive plastic in packaging and excessive colors and dyes in their packaging, and half of the product gets thrown away because you open it up and half of it is packaging and half of it is the actual product. And so half of what you buy ends up just getting wasted and thrown away. You walk into Walmart and they've got this big giant cardboard cutout celebrating Earth Day, and then you realize that they had to cut down a tree to make it, and they have 2 of them in every store, and so they probably cut down thousands of trees to virtue signal about how they're saving the planet on Earth Day. And these very same people tell us that we can't drive our cars back and forth to work because that's destroying the planet. Meanwhile, they're buying yachts that guzzle up more gasoline for one single trip than the rest of us do in our entire lifetimes. And they're buying private jets and they're flying to all of these summits to talk about how the rest of us are destroying the planet. Meanwhile, each one of their carbon footprints is massively bigger than any of ours. So it makes it kind of hard to take them serious. So that's where I see them exploiting and exaggerating a problem in order to achieve a political agenda. And in my opinion, that agenda is to depopulate the planet, to get rid of all of us that they see as useless eaters now that they no longer need us to keep the economy going. And taking this whole thing back to Walmart, the average trip through your local Walmart, it's kind of hard not to see where they're coming from. I mean, I'm in the bakery section of my local grocery store the other day, and I see a woman there shopping. She's 350 pounds, massively overweight, and I'm nobody to judge. I struggle with my own weight as well. Anybody who's watched years worth of my videos watches my weight fluctuate, so I'm not judging, but I am kind of judging because I look at this lady. She's way overweight. She looks like she's struggling to breathe, and she's wearing a mask because Corona is the thing that's the real threat to her, while she's piling up her grocery cart with baked goods, with a big box of a dozen donuts. And I'm thinking to myself, those donuts are going to kill you so much faster than Corona is going to get to you. And that mask is doing nothing to protect you. But this woman is completely brainwashed by the news, and her priorities, her reality about what is an actual threat or an actual danger to her is completely backwards. She has no problem scarfing down a bunch of donuts, but she's afraid to go out in public without a mask on. Again, no judgment, but that reflects a majority of the just mind dead people out there. People who consume way more than they produce, people who add very little to society, to the economy whatsoever, people who just gobble, gobble, gobble and don't create anything of value, people who lack any critical thinking skills, people who have no idea what's an actual threat to them versus what's a hyperbolic, blown out of proportion threat, people who refuse to do any thinking for themselves. That makes up the majority of the population. And so for the ruling elite looking down on all of us, and they see that the majority of their workers are no longer needed, and what's worse, the majority of their workers fit into that category of that type of person who just consumes, doesn't produce value, and barely has 2 working brain cells to rub together. Yeah, I can see why they would want to cull the population. Not that I agree with it, but I can understand it. So when these people make declarations on the Georgia Guidestones like, we need to maintain the global population at 500 million people, I can see why those of us who aren't the brain dead consumer masses might freak out about that. But I can also see where the global elite see it as a logical position to hold. The next undefendable position that I'm going to attempt to defend is the position of global governance. Now, a lot of my libertarian and anarchist friends would say, we don't need any government at all. And a lot of my Christian conservative friends would say, well, global governance was talked about in the Bible, the New World Order, the Satanic World Order, where the Antichrist comes and sets up a global government. And while I kind of agree with both of those positions, I'm not here to preach to the choir. I'm here to play devil's advocate, like I said. And so I'm going to defend what I see as why some people might want global governance. And I'm going to do that as a business owner. So as a business owner, all of the different rules and regulations out there suck. It sucks trying to navigate international business. All of the different rules and regulations, the things you're allowed to say in your advertisements that in one country that you're not allowed to say in another country, the ways that you're allowed to market in one country that you're not allowed to market in the other countries, things that you have to pay taxes on in one country that you don't have to pay taxes on in another country, having to have accountants that know international tax laws, having to have lawyers that know international speech regulations, having to jump through a billion different loopholes to do business in all of these different countries, especially now when the internet has opened up business to the entire world, where you can be located in one place, but you can be doing business with people all over the entire world, and having hundreds of thousands of different governments out there, all with their own rules, their own regulations, their own tax collectors, their own regulators to buy off. It's a pain in the ass, let me tell you. And so as a business owner, to make things streamlined and more efficient, I would much prefer to have one set of rules for doing business across the entire world. I would like to have one tax rate. I would like to know that if I don't have to pay a specific tax in this particular place, I don't have to pay it anywhere. If I'm allowed to market one way in one country, I'd like to be able to market that same way in all of the different countries. And instead of having an accountant that has to be versed in 50 different tax laws, I'd like to have an accountant who only has to be versed in one. I don't want to have to worry about VAT taxes and differing privacy laws and having to keep track of which rules apply to which jurisdictions. As a business owner, all of that shit sucks. So yeah, I'd rather have one governing body that's over everything, because one government is a lot easier to deal with than 50 different governments. But the other side of me knows that one government means there's no escape. If you're living in Nazi Germany, you want to flee to a country that's not quite as oppressive, you want more than just one government. You want options. If you want to abort your baby, you don't want Texas being the government for the entire world. If you want to sit back and relax and enjoy some marijuana, you don't want Wyoming being the government for the entire world. If you want to collect guns and be able to protect your family, you don't want New York City being the government for the entire world. Different strokes for different folks. A bunch of different sovereign governments gives people the ability to decide, hey, this type of culture, this type of legal system fits my lifestyle better. I'd much rather live over here than over here. And that gives you the choice of where you want to live, what kind of rules you want to live by, what kind of culture and community you want to take part in. And having that choice gives us the ability to compare and contrast, to compete, to see which systems work better. Whereas if we only had one government, there was no competition between the different governments whatsoever, then I think everything would stagnate, and I don't see that being able to sustain itself for very long. So ultimately, as a business person, which most of the global elite see themselves as or are in fact business people, I can understand the appeal of global governance. But as somebody who values personal freedom, liberty, and independence, I tend to lean towards decentralized governments, smaller, more localized, decentralized ways of organizing society. So again, I don't completely agree with the globalist point of view, but I understand it. And that brings us to the third thing that I'm going to talk about today, and this is probably going to be the most controversial, and that is keeping power a secret. And I mean that on two levels. Number one, as a marketer, I've been into persuasion and manipulation and influence tactics for most of my life, for at least the last 20 years. This is something that I've studied with an intense ferocity. It's a knowledge and a skill base that I use to make myself a lot of money. And it's also something that I have done my best to inform the masses about, but most of them just don't seem interested in learning about. There's a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he wrote it as a psychologist, and he wrote it as a way to warn people about all the different ways that they're being manipulated by politicians and marketers out there. And he was like, hey, this is all of the manipulation tactics that you, the masses, are being subjected to on a daily basis. And the masses never adopted the book. It never became a hit with the masses. Instead, it became a hit with marketers. So the very people that he was writing the book for decided not to buy it, and the very people he was writing the book to warn people about are the ones who decided to buy the book. And so Cialdini, being the smart guy that he is, from that point forward, stopped trying to wake people up and started writing books for marketers. He realized, hey, the masses don't want to be educated on this stuff. I want to tell people about it, and the only people who want to buy this information are the people I'm trying to warn people about. I might as well sell my stuff to them instead. And honestly, I kind of feel the same way. I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to wake people up to all the manipulation tactics used by the mainstream media, to wake people up to all the manipulation tactics used by politicians, to show people, hey, this is the science behind what I do. This is how I use it to sell people stuff, and this is how it's used to manipulate the entire population. I get my megaphone out and I scream it to the masses. And what do I get in return? I get called a conspiracy theorist. That's what I get as a thank you. And so I did the same thing that Cialdini did. I said, you know what? If the masses don't want to hear about it, I'm just going to tell this stuff to other business owners and marketers. And that's why the content that I'm putting into this week's episode, which is something that I'm really passionate about, doesn't actually make up the majority of my content anymore. The majority of my content nowadays is made for people who want to utilize this information for their own personal gain, rather than for people who want to utilize it for their own self-defense. I'd much rather make this content for people to use as intellectual self-defense, but the majority of the people out there who could use it that way just aren't interested. So why bother trying to force it on them? Why try to throw pearls before swine? And that's how I feel nowadays about teaching people about manipulation and persuasion and influence tactics and propaganda techniques. I'm tired of trying to wake people up. So if I'm going to talk about this stuff, I'm going to talk about it with people who actually want to hear about it, who actually want to learn about it. And that's business owners and marketers. So am I trying to keep this power a secret? No, not really. But am I trying to force it down the throats of the masses who just aren't interested in consuming it? No, not really. And I run into the same problem when it comes to stuff of a metaphysical nature. I love geeking out about the nature of reality. What is consciousness? How does consciousness affect the world around us? How does the way that you think inform the way that you act? The direction that your life ultimately takes? Is there any legitimacy to theories like the law of attraction? Are there ghosts? Are there spirits? Is there a such thing as magic? Can you cast spells or pray in a certain way that alters reality? These are things that I'm interested in, that I've explored, and I've found a lot of power in as far as directing where my life is going. And when I look at the global elite and I look at the symbolism in their statues and the symbolism in their artwork and the symbolism in their speeches, I know for a fact that a lot of the people that run these giant corporations and sit in these high political offices, I know for a fact that they understand these things the same way that I do. When I look at the sacred geometry and the occult symbolism and the magic sigils and all of these corporate logos, I know that these people are keyed into a more metaphysical, ritualistic aspect of reality. And I also see that they keep it a secret. But I can't blame them, because when I've tried to talk about this stuff to the average person out there, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to accept the fact that the way that they think has a lot to do with where they're at in life. When I bring these things up, I usually get one of two different reactions from people. Number one, I get called crazy, and number two, I get called a witch. I get told that I'm playing with fire and it's gonna condemn me to hell. So, as a rule, I tend not to talk about this stuff with people. And honestly, sometimes I question, like, if the average person did know how much power they have over reality, if the average person realized that just by thinking things and focusing their attention, they could manipulate the world around them, if everybody knew that they had that power and started utilizing that power, how chaotic would the world be around us? I mean, most of these people can't even control their own consumption habits, can't even control their own emotions. Are they really mature enough to be playing with the powers of creation itself? And if I was sitting up in an ivory tower looking down at the brainwashed masses, the mindless, consuming, useless eaters out there, would I really trust them with this kind of power? Or would I paint it as fiction, as make-believe, as something that doesn't actually exist outside of a Harry Potter or Sabrina the Teenage Witch TV show? Would I let them know that it was real and it was their birthright? Or would I make them think that it was evil and a sin and that they should stay away from it at all costs? To be honest, if I was in their position, I don't know what I would do, but in my own experience, just like the marketing stuff, the persuasion, the manipulation, the propaganda, most people aren't interested in understanding it to make their life better. And it's the same thing when it comes to metaphysics and magic. Most people just aren't interested in it and they don't care about using it to make their life better. So again, why throw pearls before swine? When you take a moment to pull yourself out of the picture and look at society from an outsider point of view, it becomes clear that while most people say that they want freedom, they really don't. They want to be told what to do, they want to do what they're told, and then they want to be congratulated for doing the right thing. They want to tune in to their favorite talking head on TV, be told what they're supposed to believe about the world, and then they want to stand around the water cooler the next day at work and mindlessly repeat what they heard the talking head on TV tell them the night before. They want to be free to pick their favorite sports team or to pick whether they like Coke better than Pepsi, but beyond that, most people don't want to be free. Most people don't want the responsibility that comes with freedom. Most people don't want to think for themselves. So if you're sitting at the top of society and you tried to push enlightenment onto the masses, and the majority of them just wanted to go back to their superstitions and wanted to go back to their tribalism and just begged for someone to tell them what to believe about the world, you tried to set the masses free and most of them just turned around and begged to have their chains put back on them, then what do? Now, of course, there's me and there's millions of other people out there like me who don't want the shackles, who do want freedom, who do want the ability to choose. And I don't think that we should be forced to live in mental bondage just because we're the minority. But hey, democracy, what can you do, right? So, like I said at the beginning of the show, there's no real marketing lesson here. And I really just wanted to take some time to explore these ideas and offer a little bit of understanding understanding and defense of the other side, play devil's advocate for at least one episode, give you some stuff to think about, and hopefully get your thoughts in the comments down below. If you found this episode enlightening or thought-provoking and you want to use it to invoke or provoke some thought in the people around you, maybe consider sharing it on your social media feeds. I'm an egomaniac and I appreciate all the attention I can get. And until next time, I'm Nathan Frazier, High Priest of Propaganda, and I'm out of here. Deuces. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you always catch the content we create for you in the future.